Well, good evening, everybody. It is so good to see so many people here tonight. It is very exciting. We're going to have a very interesting night talking about Noah. We thank Tim for coming along and preparing tonight. Now, for those that weren't here last week, we kicked off the series with Abraham, which is a fantastic night. And if you did miss it, feel free to jump online to Cumberland Ecclesial website and you can view last week's title. And hello to all those watching online, especially Dan. Okay, we'll now make a start, and we'll start by, if you just bow your heads, we'll just open the word of prayer. Our loving, merciful God in heaven above, we come before you so grateful for this beautiful day you've given us and bring us all here safely. And as we read your word tonight, please help us to understand the things we read and discuss tonight. For we know it's life eternal to know you and your dear Son. We thank you for these wonderful stories that we can learn from and the wonderful Bible characters we learn about. We know you're working in those characters' lives just as you're working in our lives today. We are very grateful for that. So we pray that you would watch over us tonight and please be with Tim. We now leave this night in your care, giving praise to your great name. In Jesus we pray. Amen. Now, as an introduction, we're going to have Lee come forward and read for us Genesis chapter 6. And I'll ask Tim to come up after that. Thanks.
Okay, Genesis chapter 6. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was very sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man who I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing flood waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go out into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. Thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did.
Thanks, Lee. And Noah was just a man, but we are just men and women too. And we've got an epic story tonight to tell with Noah. And it's a story that there's some familiarity with. I don't know if you've seen Hollywood's recent goes at it. It's pretty interesting. Doesn't bear a lot of reflection on this, but interesting. And that word means something in my household. I don't know if it means the same thing in yours. It kind of means weird, right? But Noah's story tonight is epic on a very, very grand scale, and it's got emotion in it, it's got drama, it's got maths, it's got a bit of philosophy in there. It's got God interacting with mankind in a very real and very present way. And the conclusion of what we're getting to with telling the story of Noah tonight is really just in that last verse of Genesis chapter 6. Noah did according to all that God commanded him. He did it. Noah's a man of action. Noah's a man that God says, I do. And that's probably the biggest lesson we can get out of that as we're telling this pretty epic story. But before I begin to tell the story, I think we need a bit of context because the idea tonight is really just to tell the story, go through step by step, how did it plan out in the Bible. We've got about 3 chapters we need to get through, Genesis 6, 7 and 8, and a bit of 9. And as we're going through there, though, we're going to have to keep stepping out a little bit because we want a bit of context. We want to build the picture. We want to understand what's going on. And before you jump into the story of Noah, I think you need to go back a few pages because this is a story that doesn't make a lot of sense if you're trying to explain it naturalistically. And some people do that. Some people like to take the God out of the Bible. They like to say, this could have happened. There's some archaeological evidence for floods and maybe this maths and that, and if you multiply this, okay, that's nice. But this is a story about God. And God starts this story in creation. In the beginning, God. God, all-powerful, creates everything that we can see around us. And this is a record we have to use as the context for Noah. 6 days he worked, and then he has a day of rest. On day 2, and I'm skipping some details in here because these are the relevant ones for Noah's story. On day 2, God separates clouds from oceans. He's messing around with water in a massive, massive way. Day 3, he's gathering waters together in one place so that dry land appears. Pretty important as we get to this story tonight. Day 6, God creates man and land animals from dust. There was none of them before, and God makes all of them and makes them live. Epic, epic stuff. We also have a nice little clue that rain was like mists watering the ground in Genesis chapter 2. And that last point there is a really critical one for me. It's the one that says Jesus Christ talked about Adam and Eve and creation like it was a real thing that happened, not like it was some parable or story. So we take it the same way tonight. As Christadelphians, we believe the record of creation, the story of Noah, is a real story about real God influencing real people on the earth. So none of what we're talking about tonight is an allegory. It's not a lesson so we can learn some principle. It's a thing that happened. And it's tragic in some ways. So last week we talked about Abraham, and I thought it'd be good to start with a bit of a picture. Because Abram is right down here. Here he is. This is the life of a man who lived 175 years. 175 years. The paler section, the text is really small. Paler section is before they had their first son. The darker green section is how long they lived afterwards. And that's a reflection of the way the biblical record describes their life. Adam lived so long, and then he had his son Cain, and then he lived so long after that. Add the two together and you've got their full lifespan. And what you're seeing here is something that says this is not normal life today as we experience it. These days, if we get 100 years old, letter from the Queen era, if you're in the monarchy or in the Commonwealth, words, right? You know, you've done pretty well. But Adam there, he's pushing 900 and still going, the first man. There's something different about their genetics, there's something different about what was going on. Were they sort of more pure? Did things less corrupted? Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, lots of L's in there. Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, interesting name, Methuselah, Lamech, and then Noah. And what I think is really interesting is Noah is the first generation that would have been brought up and they had to tell him about Adam. Every other generation before him would have gone to visit Adam, and Adam would have said, let me tell you what happened in the Garden of Eden. Let me tell you about that snake. Let me tell you the lesson. Noah got it secondhand. But they called him Noah because his name means rest, because they wanted rest from the curse that God had given them after they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Generation after generation, they've been feeling the effects of God withdrawing from them because of the sin and the mortality that they had. But I said Methuselah's name's interesting. He's in the record books as the longest living person ever. His name has an interesting meaning. The meth bit in the beginning kind of means death. And the rest of the name hints at when he goes, bad things are going to happen. Methuselah made it all the way through to the flood. And so we get to sort of Noah's era. And you get that interesting little note in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 3. God said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever. He's flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So God has put up with humankind sort of going the wrong way for a bit, and he's put a limit on it now. 120 years. So count back from that line of the flood, 120 years. That's when God said those words. And after the flood, we see lifespan decreases a little bit. Something, down here, still 175. We're not into the normal yet. But I do find it really interesting. So even Abram, he would have grown up potentially being able to visit Noah if they were still in the same part of the world. He could have said hello to the man. That's how, and we know that in those eras before writing, things were passed down by word of mouth. It makes you wonder what lessons were passed down from generation to generation in that time. So, just before the next one, we've got an idea in terms of Adam and Eve. They had 2 kids to start with, 2 sons, Cain and Abel. And we had a story of Cain killing his brother Abel, the first murder. And then Abel was replaced by Seth. And the Bible tells the story of these 2 types of people. Cain and his generations, they said, God, not for me. I'll do what I want, I'll live my way. And they went off and did their own thing. Whereas Seth's lineage gets us down to Noah who walks with God and does what God says. And that's the background for what triggers this flood scenario. What goes wrong? We have the sons of Cain, the murderer. They build cities. The man takes 2 wives because he's greedy. They have agriculture, entertainment, industry, brass and iron. They're very busy people. You can possibly imagine they might have been very wealthy people. These are the sons of Cain doing very well. Perhaps even you might call them mighty. On the contrast, you've got Seth's people leading up to Noah. And the human population grows. And I think that's maybe an important bit of context because we live in a city of 1 million people. There could have been up to 1 million people wandering around at the time of the flood. Could be more, could be less. They lived a very long time, but they waited a long time to have kids. It says they only had a few, apparently, so their lives were very different to ours today. But the human population is growing, and in the start of Genesis chapter 6, you get a few really interesting verses which aren't actually that easy to unpick. And you can look at it a couple of different ways. You've got the ideas here of The sons of God saw the daughters of men, they were beautiful. There were giants on the earth, and the sons of God met the daughters of men, and they had children, and they were mighty men of old, men of renown. And there's really interesting words in there. And if we take them back to their Hebrew meanings, because the Bible was written in that Hebrew language, you can look at it a couple of different ways. You can look at it just in the sense of mighty men seeing women and going, I'll have that, mine. But the end result is that what was two lines, Cain's people doing whatever they wanted versus Seth's people doing what God wanted, the end result is intermarriage and almost nobody doing what God wanted. And you get that comment in verse 5. God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth. Every intent of the thoughts of his heart was evil continually. It was all they thought about. Everything was, what does God's way look like? Let me do the opposite. I'm going to have fun here. And this immensely personal note in verse 6 there. God was sorry that he'd made man on the earth. He was grieved in his heart. And I think those are powerful words to ascribe to God. He's obviously given those words to himself. But the idea that he could be sorry and grieved and physically upset at seeing the way that mankind was behaving, that he created in love, that he'd walked amongst them in the garden, and we've got this idea, if you read back in the Adam and Eve record, God walked amongst them, and after they'd eaten the fruit, they were afraid and ran away. He wanted to walk amongst them. He wanted to have friendly relations with them. And here he is, sorry, because all they want to do is evil. And there's probably some context to that as well. Evil in the Bible, sin in the Bible, I've had it described to me and it kind of makes sense. You might like it, you might not. Sin is things that causes relationship breakdowns between us and between God. Sin is always an antisocial thing. So evil continually possibly means sort of, America level continual murders, rapes, pillages, all that other stuff. That's God looks at the people that he's made and he sees them suffering because of the evil, mighty men that were doing whatever they wanted. So God has to act. There's a justice element there as well. So God says, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. Man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air. I'm sorry that I made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And grace is a wonderful word to chase throughout the Bible. It doesn't mean that Noah was perfect. It doesn't mean that everything he did was exactly right. It does mean that Noah tried. And God saw something in Noah that he wants to see in us that's having a go. I want to do what you say, God. I'd like to make you happier than just seeing me wander around doing evil continually. So instead, the earth was also corrupt. The earth was filled with violence. God looked on the earth and it was corrupt. Everything was breaking down and dying faster than ever. All flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And I think the most important elements of this decision is that bit that I emphasised. Man whom I have created. And that's the philosophical element of the story of Noah. It's one of those stories, and it's a bit like God commanding Abram to sacrifice Isaac that we talked about last week. It's one of those elements that makes people go, I'm putting this book back on the shelf. This is ridiculous. What kind of God does that? What kind of God does this? But this is a God that created that life in the first place, that created that amazing potential for love and for relationship with him. And he was sorry because of the evil that they started to do. So his life, he's going to do something about it. So we've got man and beasts are going to be destroyed here, but not sea creatures. In the story of creation, sea creatures are named separately, and they're not named here. So there's an obvious link that sea creatures are going to get to keep going. So Noah and his family are selected to be saved. And this is the genealogy of Noah. It tells you a little bit about his family. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. The idea there is not perfection or but his family was extra good. It is a man who had integrity in his era. He stood apart from everybody else because people said, that's Noah, he's one of God's people. Noah walked with God, and that's another one of those key phrases. It's like if God was walking down one way, Noah wanted to be alongside. Noah wanted to be in the presence of God, doing what God did, thinking the way God thought, and talking with him. And that's a wonderful thing for us to aspire to walk with God, like Enoch and Abram that we discussed last week. So God asked Noah to build an ark. And the word doesn't occur very often in the Bible, this idea of an ark. It's the same word used for the basket that Moses was put in when Pharaoh's daughter found him floating in the Nile. So it's a very flexible word in the language. And it's made of gopher wood in apostrophes because we don't know exactly what that is. Could be cypress, just a guess really. It had rooms or nests. It was waterproofed, so pitch is black stuff that they would slap on boats to make it waterproof. And it was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, and it had a window a cubit from above. So, raise your hand if you know what a cubit is. Good answer. Very, very good. So if you're a tradie, you're probably even better to knowing what a cubit is, because it's one of these, there to there. Something you can measure things with before you've got meters, yards, or all the other kind of weird things. You've got spans, this wide, cubits, this high. Probably had some reeds and rods a bit later as you get through. Very practical things, right? You're a tradie, you want to measure something, use the material you've got. So how long was a cubit? Depends how big Noah was, but generally, let's say about half a metre. So at about 150 metres long, 25 metres wide, and 15 metres high, you get a kind of scale here in the picture that you can see. And for a wooden ship of historic era, it's huge, absolutely huge. These, the better part of the Titanic which was something that took mankind millennia to learn how to build using steel, but it's a very special size. God gave it to him exactly right to do the job it needed to do. And there's a note here that it was validated by some South Korean research, because what they looked up was, could you make it wider? Could you make it longer? Could you make it shorter? Why is it the size that it is? So if you make it longer, if you stretch the thing out, it'll actually become more stable in the ocean. You get a comfier ride out of it when it's longer. But when you make things longer, there's more leverage, there's more likely it's going to do a bit of a Titanic in the middle. You can make it wider, but then it's less stable. Noah might have had a bit more seasickness. Or you can make it shorter and the waves just go over the top, right? So it was made, designed by God to suit its very particular need. And it had to fit a lot of animals in it. We don't know exactly how many, but exactly enough. And so God says a flood is coming. I, myself, am bringing floodwaters on the earth. This is a direct action of God. There's nothing else in between. To destroy from under heaven, remember, he's in heaven, everything he can see that is offending his eyes and grieving his heart. Destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life, the thing that he gave to make life live. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I'm going to establish a promise with you, Noah. I'm going to promise you and your sons and your wives and your sons' wives with you to keep you safe. So God has a similar promise with us, which we'll hear about in later weeks and future weeks. So under heaven, it's the whole earth. Some people have also tried to explain away and said, maybe it was just a local kind of flood. They're trying to simplify the story to make it a naturalistic explanation. It's really clear. It's under heaven. It's the whole earth. It's all flesh. It's everything. Everything in which is the breath of life, the thing that God gave to Adam and the beast to make them live. And in Job 34, it's clear. If it was taken his breath, everything would just drop. We'd go back to life. but he's going to make a special relationship with Noah and his family. Noah's wife, his 3 sons, and his 3 sons' wives. That'll make a sec. So animals saved too. We know the story. 2 by 2, in they go, except when there's 7 of them. Of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you, male and female, because, birds and bees, right? Of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. This kind word is implying species here. So maybe not every kind of subspecies of dog and the poodles and labradoodles and all the rest, right? Everything after its kind. Keep them alive. And Noah had to provide food for them as well. There's been supposition that says, maybe God put them to sleep, maybe they didn't eat very much. There's miracles galore here, but God said, take food too. So we'll take the Bible at its word. Noah had to have enough room in this ark for all the animals and enough food to keep them going, and enough food for him as well. And they're going to come to you, Noah. I'm going to bring them to you. All you've got to do is get ready. So how long did it take Noah to get ready? Well, there was that pronouncement, 120 years. Then Noah got his commission, and we don't know exactly how long it took him, but it could have been 40 years. Put any figure on it you like. He had a long time to build this boat, and it would have taken him a long time to do it. But we've got that pronouncement again at the end of chapter 6. Thus Noah did, according to all that God commanded him, so he did, because Noah walked with God. And the personal element for us is this idea of, if God told you to do something utterly, utterly weird, would you do it? What would it take? Where's your limit in terms of what God would have to ask for you to do before you would say, no, I'm out, too hard? God basically asked Noah to give up the material part of his life to do something, to survive a flood that nobody had ever seen, rain that, who knows if it was ever going to happen, make a spectacle of himself. But Noah did it because he was commanded. And he did it. And then with 7 days to go, he got another commandment. The Lord said to Noah, come into the ark. In you go. You and all your household, because I've seen you are righteous. The word really means just like right, but it has that element of God's kind of right. The right that God does is the way that he says you are righteous. You're righteous before me in this generation, out of everybody else. Take with you 7 of each clean animal. Now this word is a bit unusual here. We know what it means later in the Bible, but there's no context for it here. So take with you 7 of each clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of the unclean animals, male and female, and 7 each of birds of the air, male and female. And I understand the context here is likely to imply that the 7 birds is the clean birds too. It's kind of the way the language is laid out. We're going to keep them alive because 7 more days and it's going to rain. You're at the end, Noah. It's about to happen. And it's going to rain 40 days and 40 nights. And I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made, that I have a right to do something with. And Noah was 600 years old. So he definitely didn't retire at 65. So with 7 days to go, 7's a very special number. We started with the 7 days of creation. It's a number you can track throughout the Bible with a very special meaning of completeness and God being involved. And we have this idea of like I said, the clean animals. And if you look later on into Leviticus, you'll see that clean animals refers to things that are okay to eat. They were an animal that had a very specific spiritual meaning for the nation of Israel, but there's no specific meaning granted here. So we're looking at probably the cattle, sheep, goats, and maybe some doves, that kind of thing. 7 of those that Noah can eat and do something else with, we'll see a bit later. And the ark is loaded, and 40 days of rain starts. Noah with his wife, his sons and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. They had the clean animals with them and the unclean animals. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood were on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, we get explicit detail here so we can try and understand what Noah's going through. The fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. And that's about the best fun language you can think of. The windows of heaven. So obviously the clouds and rain, that's fairly simple. The fountains of the great deep, yeah, just imagine undersea earthquakes because God's going like this to the stuff, tectonic plates going everywhere, is kind of like rending the bottom of the ocean to make the earth materially different. And the rain was on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And perhaps there's a misunderstanding when we talk about the rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, because we go, oh, that's all right, 40 days in a boat. 4 hours would be enough for me, but 40 days, I could just about do that. No. That wasn't even the half of it. But let's get to that. So we remember that detail in there. We know exactly how old Noah was and which month it was when he went into the ark. You don't have to remember that though. I'll come to it. So on the same day, they go into the ark, all the beasts and the cattle and the creeping things and the birds, all flesh in which is the breath of life, because nothing else is going to live. And they did what God commanded, and the Lord shut him in. So maybe just because it was a really big door and they didn't have hydraulics yet, but I've got this impression that maybe God shut the ark because he didn't want Noah to have to close off every other human being on the planet and say, you're going to shut them out and let them die. God made that decision for him. It's almost a bit of a mercy, I think. God says, you're in my ark now, I'm going to keep you safe. So how high were the waters? So this is where we get into a little bit of the maths, and I don't want to go naturalistic, but I don't want to leave you in a, guessing either. Because the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters lift up the ark and it rises high above the earth. No specifics. The ark moves around on the surface because it's a floating boat and there's some winds and waves. The waters prevailed exceedingly. All the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upwards, 7.5 metres more, and the mountains were covered. So the difference between the high hills and the mountains is 7.5 metres. Different kind of picture of what the earth might have looked like, and that's kind of my point. If Everest today is about nearly 9 kilometres high, and the ocean trenches, the deep ones, there's multiple of those, are nearly 10 kilometres down, the math says you actually need 3 times as much water as exists on the earth today. And obviously we know exactly what the earth's like as far down as it goes. You'd need 3 times that much to cover it if Everest is where it is and the trenches are where they are. So I'd say that the earth was somewhat different back in Noah's day. 7.5 metres between the top of the mountains and the hills and the high hills probably means the whole thing is a little bit less flatter. And then the water that we've got around us can cover it pretty effectively. But it kind of gives me an impression then that if that's the kind of upending God is doing to the structure of the earth, this was a pretty epic time to be alive if you were one of the 8 human beings able to appreciate it. But it's a fairly cruel universal fate. And again, we're getting back to the idea that only God has any right to do this. Only the God that created every creeping thing, that gave everything life, the God that was grieved in his heart and offended at the evil that was being done, had any right to do this, to simply destroy everything and go again. Because everything died. All flesh died that moved on the earth. Billions of sort of animals and people and insects and everything else. God destroyed all living things which are on the face of the ground, man and cattle, creeping thing, and the birds probably must have taken that significant length of time to die from just having nowhere to go. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those that were with him in the ark remained alive, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. The sense of prevailed there is they were 150 days coming up. 150 days for the waters to come up to their peak and get around. And it's going to take a fair bit of time to go back down again. But it does. We start in Genesis chapter 8. God remembers Noah. It's time, Noah. And every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God causes the waters to subside, to stop growing. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped. He sets things up the way they need to be. And at the end of the 150 days, the waters decreased and the ark rested, came to some ground in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. And if you can find that, you'll make yourself a lot of money, but you'll be sort of competing with all the kooks who reckon they've already found it. The waters decreased, continuing until the 10th month, and in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So our flood started in the 2nd month, and if we take months as being 30 days, back when, because we're not in Gregorian or Justinian calendars, the 17th day is the 77th day of the year. We go forward to the 7th month and the 17th day, that's 227, of which 150 have elapsed on the water, and the ark comes to a rest. And then to get to the 10th month, day 1, that's another 73 days. So 223 days have elapsed while Noah is stuck in the ark, feeding animals and dealing with the consequences of feeding animals. And 40 more days before he cracks a window. There's one window in this thing. 40 days he has to wait a bit more to open it. So obviously going on outside, things are still pretty catastrophic. So at the end of 40 days, Noah opens the window and he sends out a raven. Now what do ravens eat? Meat. Ravens eat meat. And this raven flies to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. So unfortunately, that raven has probably got enough food to eat floating around on the top of the water, and he doesn't come back. So Noah also sends out a dove, because doves eat green things, and they're nice little animals, not creepy and nasty. So he sends out the dove, and the dove finds nowhere to land. The dove comes back, and he takes her back into the ark. And he waits another 7 days, and he sends the dove out, and the dove comes back with a leaf. So the waters have gone down far enough that trees are exposed, but maybe not enough for the dove to make a nest out of. So he waited another 7 days, he sends out the dove, and the dove doesn't come back this time. The dove's found a nice place to make a home. The dove feels safe in this world. So here's another 40 days, another 7, another 54, plus the 73 waiting for the water to come down after the 150, where we've cracked 200 easily. So here we are, in the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, so waterproof covering over the top, and looked, and the surface of the ground was dry. And in the 2nd month, so he still has to wait a little bit longer because the ground is dry but maybe soggy, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. So another couple of months, 27 days, plus 127, plus 150, plus another 7 that he had to climb in before the flood started to rise. 370 days-ish. Don't quote me. It's funny maths in here. It's a bit, you're reading between the lines and trying to add things up. But he spent a really, really long time in that ark. So when you're telling the story of Noah, it'd make a pretty long Hollywood movie if they were doing it accurately. It'd be tedious. There's a lot of work to get done. It was messy work. It wasn't a glamorous thing that Noah did, building a great big ark that nobody knew what to do with, working year after year after year, knowing that something horrific was going to happen, and then doing that. There's not a lot of glamour in Noah's life. It's just hard work for years and years and years. And the result is that he's saved. So they finally get to go. So imagine they basically skip down the plank, right? Go out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons and your wives with you, bring everything out, and out they go. According to their families, they went out of the ark. So God obviously helping them to exit in an orderly fashion, so little ones didn't get tromped on by the elephants, and they're free. And what's the first thing that Noah does when he gets out? Noah builds an altar to God. And he took of every clean animal and of every clean bird. So there's only 7 of each. Now there's only 6. Because Noah's taken one of each of those and offered them as burnt offerings in gratefulness to God for keeping him alive. And God recognized that just like Abel's sacrifice right in the beginning, Genesis chapter 3-ish, 4, that here is a new start. Here is somebody that wants to build a people and show to his sons, this is how we're going to serve God. And God says in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. So again, there's a very personal element here. God's talking to himself. And he's changing the behaviour that he did when he kicked Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. I'm not going to curse the ground again, give them another fresh start with a fertile earth, but I'm not going to destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, day and night shall not cease. So right at the very beginning of our Bible, God has set a context and set a promise that he's not going to do this again. So if you ever hear somebody say, oh, but later on in the Bible it says he's going to destroy all of... He said he's not going to do it again. So, right from the beginning. And God blesses him for his faith. Noah, you've done exactly what I want. You know who I am. You know what I want you to do. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth up again. It's a blank slate. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the air, on all that move on the earth and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. So right from the beginning, Adam and Eve were given dominion over the animals. God says to Noah, they're going to be afraid of you because you have me with you. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I've given you all things, even as the green herbs, but don't eat flesh with its life. Interesting commandment to give to Noah, fresh out of the ark. It's kind of like saying, kill the animals humanely, please. Don't be like those barbarians that you might have seen torturing animals and eating them alive and doing strange things. And this is where we got the later laws about clean animals and ritual bloodletting, kosher killing to make sure that animals weren't eaten in a live state, they weren't tortured, and blood wasn't eaten. Because God is saying life is something that I have control over. I don't want you eating life with some strange ritual to it. You can eat an animal for food, but life comes exclusively from me, says God. And you've got there also the element of humans and animals distinguished. There's a very big difference as to why murder is a word that we use exclusively for humans. So surely for your lifeblood, in other words, if somebody hurts you, I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every man's beast I will require it, from the hand of a man, so even if an animal causes a human's death. From the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. God's setting a principle that I alone have the power of life and death. Murder is something that is horrific to me. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. He doesn't want murderers living on the earth. It's hate and it's something he despises. Because humankind is in my image. I've created humankind, men and women, to respond to me. to have a relationship with me, to do what I do, to think how I think, to walk with me. Animals are there for food. There isn't a reward coming for animals. They can't respond to me in any way. Be nice to them, kill them properly, then eat them. But humankind are unique amongst every other animal. And so God then makes a covenant with us. There are words here that apply specifically to us. God speaks to Noah and to his sons with him and says, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. And that's pretty well every human being alive on the earth. And with every living creature that is with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And he institutes the rainbow as a sign of that covenant. I think it's kind of an interesting one here because you can gloss over the language and go, oh yes, rainbow, that's a sign of promise. But read it carefully. This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you, a personal promise between God and mankind. And every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations, again and again and again. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, God sends rain, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant. I will remember. You'll see the rainbow, but I'll remember. I'll remember that person, Noah, the one who tried to do the right thing. And because I remember that good covenant, the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy the earth. The rainbow shall be in the cloud. I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. This is the sign of that covenant. Now, rainbow definitely has a reference to the arch of a bow. The word definitely means that sort of bow and arrow style shape. But I do think it's kind of interesting that if you're looking from the other side, if you're looking as God would look at a rainbow, they can be round. God sees things differently than we do. We need to keep God's perspective on things when we read the context of the story of Noah, of Adam and Eve, of the stories that are going to come to pass again. It's important to see it the way he would. So I did say that Noah wasn't perfect, glossing over this story a little bit, but Noah and his sons leave the ark. We get introduced to the man called Canaan, who is the son of Ham, and from these people, the whole earth is populated. And one of the first things Noah does is plant a vineyard and gets drunk, does something a bit silly. His sons are foolish, and Noah issues a curse upon Canaan to say, you're now going to be a servant. So already, just to flick back a couple, there is this one. Never going to work, is it? God says, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. Even though there is only Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their 3 wives on the earth, God knows that mankind is going to struggle from their youth not to do evil, because it's in all of us. We want to be selfish. We want to do whatever we want to do. We imagine evil things all the way from the beginning. So unfortunately, there is Noah getting drunk, doing the wrong thing, and cursing his grandson, who stumbles upon him being drunk and being silly, and he curses him with servitude. But Noah lived after the flood 350 years, so all up 950 years that Noah lived on the earth, before and after, telling that story to the successive generations of what it was like to live back when Adam's son was still alive, back when Adam's grandson was still alive, and what the flood was like. This story would have gone down to every generation of people everywhere they spread out. Let me tell you about the flood. So there we have Noah's family and the curse that he gave to Canaan. A servant of servants you'll be. Canaan will be Shem's servant. God's going to enlarge Japheth. So a very typical story back then of blessing and cursing for the children. It's something you can take up with your own children as you like to bless and curse them. But it was a promise that was fulfilled. If you look at later conquests in that area, in the land of Canaan, you can see that Canaan was conquered. And I found this interesting representation. So if you turn to Genesis chapter 10, there's a massive list of names in there of Shem, Ham and Japheth's children. And you can kind of track them a little bit about where they went. So looking over on the bottom there, descendants of Ham coming through there, Japheth going up to the top, and Shem kind of hanging around the middle there. And those tribes spreading out. And we see those original names spreading into the nations that they then became as they filled the whole earth. And just to close tonight, just in a few words, Noah has a number of references in the rest of the Bible. So again, we talked about Noah walking with God, Noah doing what God said. Noah's also called a preacher. But Jesus Christ says something particular when he refers to Noah. And again, he's referring to Noah as it was a real man, a thing that really happened. He says God is going to judge this world again because the people are going to be like Noah's time. Because all they did in Noah's time, Jesus says, is marry, given in marriage. All they thought about was themselves. That idea of thinking evil continually. This idea that God is something they don't consider, or they consider and go, I'm going to reject that and do exactly the opposite. In Hebrews chapter 11, which tells about a number of faithful people, Noah is called faithful because when he was warned, he acted, and he was called or given righteousness. He became the heir to righteousness because God said, you've done the right thing. I asked you to do something, and you did it. And Peter, in his letters, talks about, again, the coming judgment. He talks about Noah as a preacher. And he talks about the ark as a symbol of baptism, as a symbol of Jesus Christ. Baptism being going down into water, getting completely surrounded by water, and leaving that as a new person, somebody who wants to dedicate their life to God. The idea of having a sinful life before and a life dedicated to God afterwards. So Peter uses this symbology of the flood and the ark with Jesus Christ to say this is an essential act that is required in the life of a believer to lead forward to salvation. And there's that reference there. So when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, while the ark was being built, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And this water symbolises baptism that now saves you also. So every Christian is called to baptism. Not the removal of dirt from the body, it's not just a bath, but the pledge of a clear conscience towards God, that I'm going to live differently. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who's gone into heaven and is at God's right hand with angels, authorities and powers in submission to him. So the story is epic, but simple. Really, really simple. God commanded Noah, and Noah took action. Noah wanted to walk with God, to be alongside God, to think the way he did, to talk with him, to have him as a friend. And the only way that's possible is to do what God wants from us. So thank you very much.
On your behalf, I'd really like to thank Tim for that preparation that's went into tonight. Absolutely amazing. I learned a lot about all the peripheral things, so thank you. Now, God willing, next week, please come along, same time, same place, but this time we're going to be discussing the life of Ruth. And if you haven't heard of Ruth, then you definitely need to come next week, because she's an amazing woman. Also, if you get a chance on Sunday night at 8 p.m, tune in to Coast FM, which is 88.7, and we have a 1-hour show called Bible Spotlight on all sorts of different Bible topics. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you all here next week. We're going to have supper afterwards, and we do apologise for the painting out there. If you do need to go to the loos, you're probably going to have to do a hop, skip and a jump over some paint pots and whatnot, ladders, and you can still use the toilets in the foyer, but they've just asked if you're not going to the loo, no one touch the walls, but just stay out of that area if you can. Thank you for coming, and we'll just close with a word of prayer if you just remain seated. Our loving Heavenly Father, great Creator of heaven and earth, we thank you for the story of faithful Noah and his family, and how you saved them via water. We also live in a world that is mostly selfish and evil in your sight. So please help us to stand firm and wait patiently for your Son's return to save us. Please be with all those that are preparing for baptism, that they might see your love and mercy and saving work that you are offering via water and your beloved Son. We now thank you for the supper, for we realise that all good gifts come from your hand. We leave our lives in your care and ask this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.